Greetings, I'm Chris Doran and welcome to another DBMM Army review. This week we're looking at the Normans, again an army that's more fun than competitive, won't win that many competitions, it's a little clumsy, but 1066 and all that, what's not to like? So we're going to be looking at the 1066 version, so because you can get Blade and CV, that gives you, with the Breton cavalry, that gives you a bit more strategic flexibility and mobility. In general, its strengths are that it's got hard-hitting knights, it's got good support for them across the CV, bow and blade, so you can do combined arms. However, it's very clumsy, so difficult to coordinate all those different troops. Overall, it's probably going to win from the Night Charge on quick kill, but it's also a pretty tough and very broad army, so it has potential for outflanking as well. So let's have a look at the detail of the army list. So the base army list, the only compulsory troops are the Knight F, but there is a huge number of those. There are 18 Knight F, so we have to build our list around that. Now once we have that, there are different options. There's the 1066 version that will give you compulsory Blade O. You could think of a Viking ally, you could think of the Normans in Sicily. Each of those have a different flavour because the base list is very clumsy if you leave it as it is. We're going to look at the 1066 list, the reason being that the Breton CVO and the Blade O give you more dimensions and more balance to your list rather than just relying on the Night Charge. And in which case, as well as the minimums of the Knight F and the Blade O, I would also consider core troops are the CVO and also the Siloi. We want as many Siloi as we can get in this army because it is quite clumsy, and any liquidity that we can provide with the Siloi will be very beneficial. So if we look at my suggestions for the 1066 list, we start with an aggression of 3 because we are Normans. That means we're likely not to be able to choose the terrain. So we have to be able to cope with our enemy giving us some tricky terrain to overcome. We're not that good in bad terrain. We can handle a bit of rough in the 1066 army, but we'd rather have more open country in general. We're pretty high on the total MEs. We're at 98. That's because we've picked some troops like Horde in order to bump that up. What else? We have gone with 4 commands because we're in a regular army. We want all the pips we can get, so the 4 commands give us a bit more flexibility. They are all sub-general commands because the Bretons are sub-generals, not allies at this time. And our MEs, we've hit the magic numbers on 28, 24 and 20. For Command C, it is a purely knight command, and so we don't have to worry about hitting disheartened with a quarter of the MEs. We only have to worry about breaking at 18. So that is breaking at a third of the elements lost. So we can do that most efficiently by having an 18 ME command for our knight command. Looking at what we've spent the points on, we have bought Feign Flight. That's one of the ways that we can handle the fragility of the Knight F, and also it's in theme. If we're going with 1066, that was won by the Normans through Feign Flight, so we'll include that in our options. So 10 points spent on the stratagem of feigned flight for our knight Fs to use. Looking at our 4 commands, we have a different job for each one of them. Let's start with Command B. That's the heavy infantry command, the blade O. That really has to act as the solid line which the other commands maneuver around, because it's quite clumsy and slow. Looking at the other commands, Command A would be the hinge, so that would be deployed next to Command B in the critical spot. Then we have our hammer and our wing. We've got our Command C, which is the knights, and we've got our Command D, which is the Breton cavalry. Normally those would operate together, with the Breton cavalry providing the flexibility that will support the knight charge in Command C. Looking at the details, we have got half of our knights dismounted. That is compulsory for this list, and the other half are knight F. We have all the Bretons in one command. Again, that's compulsory. It would be nice to spread the Breton cavalry out so that we had them mixed in with the knight commands, but they all have to go under the Breton leader, and the Breton leader can't have any knights in their command. So unfortunately we need to space them out. Command C is just knights. That makes it efficient in terms of MEs, and we just hope we don't roll a 1 too often on that one and have to make impetuous moves. So we'll need to manage impetuous for Command C. Our other knights are in Command A with the C and C, and therefore are probably not going to be able to hold, because they can hold even on a dice roll of 1 for the pips. So those are our commands. Pretty efficient in terms of MEs, and each with a different role. We have gone with the full 8 army baggage. That helps achieve a high ME for the overall army, and 4 different roles for the commands. Let's have a look at the troops. So let's start looking at Command B, the infantry command. This is really the anvil that holds the line, and the cavalry maneuvers about around it. That's because it's slow, it maneuvers very badly, and is therefore going to bear the brunt of the enemy attacks. It's pretty broad because you deploy the blade too deep. That will make it strong against knights. If you're not facing knights, you could consider deploying it only 1 deep, but make sure you have reserves around in case you lose some troops. It's got as many siloi as we can in order to provide it with some liquidity. That could easily either be deployed to a flank in order to hold some difficult ground and give them a secure flank, where the cavalry attacks through the other flank, or it could be deployed behind in order just to give it that extra bit of liquidity and able to fill gaps and do hard flanking with less pips. The one thing to be careful of, you've got to have the knight F commander, and that will be impetuous, so you might want to turn him backwards so that he doesn't have the impetuous charge when you don't need it, and since he's irregular he can't help move your troops with pips in any case. So you could turn him backwards in order to make sure that he's not impetuously charging through the rest of your troops. The I Blade O are dismounted knights because William the Conqueror didn't have enough horses brought over by his ships to mount all of his knights, so some of them took part in the Battle of Hastings dismounted. That's what these Blade O are. They're very tough, they absorb a lot of punishment, however they're clumsy and slow, so great to act as a tough defense or as an attrition grind against enemy troops. You want them in 2 ranks if they're deployed against knights, and you need to support them with siloi in order to fill gaps or protect flanks. They're very good in rough, one of the best rough troops, but they will suffer in difficult because of the pips. So fine terrain troops for rough, but not difficult. These troops are some of the new forged in battle, very nice and easy to paint. Command A is the hinge between the infantry commands and the mounted commands, and is therefore one of the most important strategic roles. That's why we've got our C&C here, in order to give it some extra pips, and also ensure that the knights won't go impetuous if we don't only roll a 1 for pips. To point out here, the scouts are very important. They provide the liquidity, which the rest of the command is all clumsy, so they can fill gaps and protect emergency flanks. The other thing to point out is that we have the bow in front with the knights behind. That will enable us to do a nice combination where the bow in the front fire on the enemy, and they push some of them back in order to break up their line, and then the knights can charge through, protecting the bow, who would be vulnerable if enemy troops got to close contact, and taking advantage of the overlaps that the bow has created. So that one can be tricky. You've got to manage your timing well, because you don't want the knights to be impetuous, and you also can't let the enemy get too close, because then there'll be no room to bring the knights through. So that is a nice tactical maneuver, but you need some preparation and planning in order to pull it off. Irregular Knight F are I consider the toughest troops to use in the game. These are the milites, the classic Norman knights that struck fear into the heart of Europe, winning in France, in England, in Sicily, in southern Italy, in Greece, in the Balkans. This was the real strength of the Norman army. I'd consider them glass cannons, that they are fragile because of the F, and not just fragile, they are also very easy to get into trouble because they are impetuous and so have to pursue, and also need the pips in order to stop them charging, and they're clumsy. They cost 2 pips to move, so that they can go ahead without flank protection. So they're hard hitting and fast, but very easy to die quickly due to that combination of fragile and hard to maneuver. So they're not much use as a reserve, they're not much use as a response. They really have to be lined up at a likely target and then just charge straight in. However, because they are clumsy, it's quite easy for the enemy to see it coming and to prepare for their charge. So how to handle them? You want to try and make sure you've got other troops that will protect the flank. For example, that's what the Bretons will do in our Norman 1066 army. We've also got feigned flight. That means they can hit hard and hopefully get some quick kills in their first round, and then we can trigger feigned flight in order to get them to back out and protect them while they're vulnerable with their F and with enemy overlaps against them. Then, because they're impetuous, they turn around automatically and are set up to charge straight back in the second round. Hopefully 2 rounds of consecutive charges would be enough to break most enemies. Command C is the strike command with just Knight F. They'll usually operate in conjunction with Command D, with D providing the Bretons providing the liquidity to prevent flanks and take advantage of any gaps. It's 18 ME, as mentioned in the army list. That enables it to, since they are all 2 ME troops, there is no impact from being disheartened. So that means they have to be broken in order to lose their effectiveness, and that means losing 6.5 troops, which means losing 4 of the knights. So with only 7 knights in the command, we would have to lose 4 of them before this command is impacted by the losses. So that is a good design for 2ME troops. Now, how do we make them a little bit tougher to handle the fragility? We could use them too deep, or we can use our feigned flight from our Commander-in-Chief in order to protect them. So our final command, Command D, is the Bretons. They must be in one single command. We'd love to spread them out and give some to the Knight commands for close support, but we have to put them all within one command. But this command's job is very much to support the Knights. They're strong enough to go wide and to spread out the enemy. That will thin out their lines ready for the Knight F charge that can break a vulnerable point. And also the CVO provide the fluidity and the liquidity to be able to protect the flanks of the Knight F, who are too clumsy to protect their own flanks. Irregular CVO are some of the most flexible troops in the game. They're pretty tough, they're great supporting troops. They don't quick kill many troops, but equally they can be effective against most troops because they don't suffer the overlaps when they're charging in. And they don't have to follow up, and foot troops can't follow up against them. So there's really jack of all trades, and the irregular CVO I think are particularly good value because then they maneuver exactly like the regular CVO and are just 1 point less. Provided you avoid bows and knights with them, then they are pretty tough, resilient troops. They're fast and they can fill gaps, they can create threats to the flank, they're effective against light horse, and in general are a great addition to any troop types, any armies, to create a balanced army. They're okay in 1 rank, they can be pretty resilient. In 2, if you're really using them against a tough enemy where they're going to take casualties, like going up against Knight F. These troops are from the new Forged in Battle range, just like the Dismounted Knights and the Norman Knights. A very good new range that is really easy to paint. An alternative deployment for the 1066 Army is to have the infantry command blade up front in a single line with the knights supporting behind. This could be a good setup against an enemy army that didn't have knights, so they will have trouble penetrating the blade line. And the idea behind it is that the blade will start to attrition the enemy front line, and then the knights can charge through them and exploit any gaps to really provide the quick kills around that rock of the blade. It could be a little hard to time that charging through, just like with the bow, but could be very effective, different deployment to hold the knights in reserve. So that's my preferred list. I like the 1066 version because it gives you the Bretons for more flexibility and strategic mobility, and it also gives you the tough blade O for the mounted troops to work around. So that is the core version. However, you could have different options for the Normans. The base option is I Knight F, and those would have probably Spear I supporting them, but it's very clumsy. Okay, you're really dependent on high roll, Knight F charge. It's hard to manage impetuous, and it's hard to protect the flanks, so you have to be pretty lucky to win with that army because it's so clumsy. Improvements on that, you can go with the Viking ally. That gives you, it doesn't help on the clumsiness, it's still very clumsy, but it gives you the tough blade line like we have in the 1066 version, which the rest of the troops can work around. A little more flexible is the Sicily version. There you can have auxiliary O and regular spear I, which represent a bit of terrain capability and also a solid spear line that can again work around the mounted can work around that and charge through it, and regular spear I is pretty robust and flexible because it's not clumsy. So that is another alternative. So we could go with the Bretons and the 1066 version. If we replace those, that's about 101 points that we're dropping. The Sicilian version, adding 12 regular spear I and 12 irregular auxiliary O, that adds about 84 points. The Viking ally, if we had the ally and 6 blade O and 10 blade I, we do have to have the blade I in that mix at this time, then that would be 80 points. So all those are alternatives for spending the points on if we move away from the 1066 version. So that's the Norman Army 1066 version. It's great fun to play William the Conqueror's army, and the Normans are famous for having conquered a lot of Europe, not just in England and France, but also in Spain and Italy and the Balkans and Greece. So they really were some of the classic warriors of history. They're tough, hard-hitting army, but it needs to be played well. You need to think ahead, a bit of foresight in order to manage it. It's a bit clumsy and slow to react, so not the easiest of armies for beginners, I would say. So let me know your thoughts. How do you design your Norman army list? What would you do that's different from my suggestions? And which armies would you like me to review next? And hit subscribe so that I can let you know when future army lists come out. Alright, and see you next time.